Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Earth, I was going to murder my own family and then take my own life and become God.
What do you think of the death penalty?
I'm opposed to it.
The state has no right to take your life, but you can murder other people?
I don't think anyone has a right to take a life.
Except you?
When I'm under hallucination, I do.
These voices from God, these hallucinations, do you still experience them?
Yes, I do.
Often?
Often.
Do you ever feel violent?
Yes, I do.
What do you feel like doing?
Killing people.
You still feel like killing people?
Yes.
Describe the feeling that you get when you feel like killing people.
Well, last March 11th, I was hallucinating, and I took a razor blade and I cut a man's throat.
Here in the hospital?
Here in the hospital.
Do you think you'd murder me, Joe?
Yes.
That's gruesome, Joe. That's horrible.
Yes, it is.
And you don't blame me if I say I hope you never get out of this place.
I hope I never do either.
Welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. In the next episode, we're going to talk about Joseph Kallinger. So, who was he? Well, let me tell you. Joseph was an American serial killer, and he was known to torture his victims. At a later time, he would commit crimes with his 12-year-old son, Michael. The original odd couple, I guess, eh? Now, he was born Joseph Lee Brenner III, born December 11th, 1935, at the Northern Liberties Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States. He was nicknamed the Shoemaker, mainly because he was actually a cobbler by trade. He was born to Joseph Lee Brenner and his wife, Judith. Now, December 1937, Joseph was placed in a foster home due to his father abandoning the family. He was adopted later on by Stephen and Anna Kallinger. Now, the couple were extremely abusive to little Joseph. In some cases, the beatings were so severe that when he was 6 years old, he suffered a hernia. This was due to a beating that his father gave him. Or, stepfather, I should say. Now, they made the kid do, weird-ass punishments, like making him kneel on jagged rocks. They'd lock him inside closets. They'd make him eat feces, burn him with irons, and they'd starve him. They'd whip him with shit and belts and whatnot. And that's quite the tall order. And it's such a horrible thing to do to a child. Nobody deserves that shit. And, all these horrible acts of abuse, they definitely ended up shaping the person who he'd become in adulthood. And so, at the age of 9, Joseph was sexually assaulted by a bunch of neighborhood kids. They beat him up, they fucking raped him. Just a bad time for this kid. Now, during his time at school, he was a very defiant boy, so he would start standing up for himself, rebelling against his foster parents and the school officials. Joseph had plans of becoming a playwright. Now, when he was a kid in school, Joseph actually directed his school play of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. That was when he was in the 9th grade. Now, when he was 15 years old, he began a sexual relationship with a schoolmate named Hilda Bergman, to which, Joseph's Austrian foster parents, they didn't really agree with. So it's kind of funny how they beat the crap out of this kid and they think it's okay to run his life going forward. That's kind of messed up. And why would he listen to them, right? The kid's starting to rebel, and Anyway, they ended up marrying in 1952, and they had 2 children. So she would divorce him later on, due to domestic violence. So he inflicted domestic violence upon her pretty much their whole relationship throughout the years, and the divorce was finalized in 1956. In 1957, he was hospitalized after having wicked bad headaches, and he started to lose his appetite. So the doctors pinpointed that to be stress from the divorce. So Joseph ended up marrying on April 20th, 1958. He actually had 5 children with his second wife, Elizabeth Baumgard. It's not really even that ironic that Joseph will be abusive going forward in his new marriage. He inflicted the same horrible punishments to his family that he had endured from his foster parents. So over time, all this craziness and shit, it ended up breaking this guy down completely, to the point where he would spend significant amount of time in mental institutions, mainly for amnesia, suicide attempts, and he was setting fires, so he was committing arson. Now in 1972, the family of Joseph, they actually had enough of his shit. So the children ended up going to police about the abuse, and Joseph had been arrested. So he served some time in jail, and during that stint in jail, he was issued an IQ test. He scored 82. Now, with the vast majority of people in the United States, they have IQs ranging from between 80 to 120, and an IQ of 100 is considered mainly average, and an IQ below 70 or to 75 is actually closer to a mental retardation. With all the doctors looking at him for all his crazy shit, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. This left state psychiatrists to recommend that he be supervised with his family. So 2 years later, Joseph Jr., this was one of Joseph's kids, he had been found dead in an abandoned construction building. This was literally 2 weeks after he took out a huge life insurance policy out on his kid. So the insurance company, they actually seen through all this bullshit, and they suspected foul play in the matter. They refused an insurance policy payout of $45,000. On November 1974, Joseph and his 12-year-old kid, he was his oldest son or whatever, Michael, he planned out a crime spree. Now, weird thing to do to bond with your kid. I mean, usually people just go hunting or fishing or something like that, but these crimes ended up spanning over Philadelphia, Baltimore, and even the New Jersey area. So this would be over a 6-week period, and the two would rob, assault, and sexually abuse families along the way. The father and son pair would gain entry to the households mainly by pretending to be salesmen. So they broke into a home in Lindenwood, New Jersey, but nobody was home, and they left. On to the second break-in. Now, this second attempt here, Joseph would sexually assault a woman who was inside. On December 3rd, 1974, the father and son pair kidnapped 4 women during their card game of bridge. This was in Susquehanna Township of Pennsylvania. They made off with around $20,000 in stolen valuables, jewelry, cash, shit like that. Afterwards, a woman named Pamela was held captive at her home, and she was made to perform sexual acts on Joseph while at gunpoint. And January 8th, 1975, a woman named Dee Dee, she was at her mom's place to help her, care for the family, her grandmother, and she had her infant son with her. Now, some of the family had been out of the house for a time, and Dee Dee noticed that Joseph and his son were walking towards the household. He would identify themselves as salesmen and, gain access inside the house. Now, the sales pitch went fucking south pretty fast, because Joseph asked her if she was alone in the house, or something along those lines, right? Who else is in the home, or whatever, right? So that kind of alerted her, which is good, because, you gotta be careful of everything these days. So, she got that uneasy feeling. She told him to go away. Now, Joseph produced a chrome revolver and he forced himself into the home. The noises made Dee Dee's young son, who was with her, curious, so he ventured into the room to see what was up. He saw his mom in a struggle with two strange men. Joseph advised them that this is just a robbery, and he questioned yet again if anybody was in the household. So, to find out, he actually held a gun to her son's head. Now, Dee Dee told her about the sick grandmother. Now, Joseph had sent Michael up to make sure she was really sick, just to make sure it wasn't all bullshit. So, Michael confirmed this, and he pushed Dee Dee into a nearby room, and he called for, a pair of scissors. So, he's like, hey, Michael, grab me a pair of scissors. So, she advised him, hey, I don't know where to get any, whatever, and that didn't really end up too well for her because he ended up binding her with duct tape. He covered her eyes and he ended up gagging her. Joseph wanted to see how much time he had to fuck around, at the crime scene and whatnot, and with Dee Dee. So he questioned her if anybody was coming home soon, to which she kind of nodded yes. So he bounded her with the electrical cord, and this was by her elbows and ankles. He sent Michael to check the front door to see if it was locked. Trigger warning here. So he stripped her son naked and he laid him next to his mother. He rolled Dee Dee on her back, forcing her legs apart. And then he noticed that she'd been on her period. He actually got fucking totally grossed out by this, and not so grossed out that he ended up removing the tampon from her vagina. Shortly after this, Dee Dee's sister, Randy, she would return to the household. She found the door locked, so she ended up ringing the doorbell to get inside the house. Joseph ended up opening the door, and he just fucking grabbed her, pulled her inside, and just so nobody could see her. He pointed a gun at her head, and, said, hey, this is a robbery, whatever, right? And she gave him $5, and that's all she had. And then he shoved her into the room with Dee Dee and her son Robert. Now, he demanded more money, and she told him about a box that was on the dresser. So he sent Michael over to check the dresser. Now, Randy was made to strip her clothes off in the same routine that happened with Dee Dee. And she too was actually on her cycle of the month, and it ended up grossing them out really hard. So soon after, the rest of the family ended up coming home. They noticed the door locked, and they went to ring the doorbell. But the door opened by an unknown man with a gun, and he instructed them to get inside the house and to get out of sight. He sent the entire family over to the living room. Now, he told them, nobody's going to be hurt if you follow our instructions. He removed the jewelry from the women first, and then he binded their feet with cords from a blind. Now, he held a gun to the head of a boyfriend of one of the girls. His name was Frank. Now, after he was all tied up, the pair searched the house for valuables. The phone rang, but that was ignored. But then a knock on the door came about. Now, Joe ended up going down to answer it. So, it was the family's neighbor. It was a girl named Maria. And she was very quickly hauled inside and forced to lay down. Frank was gagged with a handkerchief. He was bound with tape around his face, and he was fucking hogtied. Now, it's kind of weird. I'm just curious, if Joseph did this possibly because he was a threat to him, and all his violent plans and shit could be totally interrupted if this guy got free or whatever, right? Or if he was stronger than him, shit like that, right? So Joseph ended up holding a knife to Frank's dick, stating that if he moved or made a sound at all, this goes, he said. So Frank here was all blindfolded up, so he couldn't see shit about what was gonna go on or what was happening, right? He could only hear what he assumed to be Maria being raped. He kept assaulting her during this. He beat her up, and eventually he got the idea here for during the assault or whatever, that Joseph wanted her to bite Frank's dick off. when she refused, that's a pretty fucked up request, and refusal of that, it's not going to go over well. Now, Michael was upstairs watching the others. Joseph ended up slicing Maria's throat from ear to ear, possibly for the refusal. I mean, that was just a weird-ass request, and that's not even known, if that was the reason that he killed her or not. Now, Michael had screamed from upstairs as one of the folks got loose, so they ended up fucking bolting out the door, which, anybody would get the fuck out of there. Now, Michael and his dad ended up beelining out of there. They ran, they made their escape, and they weren't going to stick around the crime scene and all the fucking horrors, that they just caused that family. So police soon responded to the scene this was at 124 Greenwood Avenue, and they definitely weren't ready for all the crazy shit that was about to await them inside that house, I'll tell you that much. So the two cops that went to investigate there, that was one Sergeant Robert R. McDougal and a Sergeant Henry Alston. Now, during the search of the house, they found a bloody, discarded shirt. This was located close to the crime scene. So, it didn't take police long to trace it back to fucking Joseph due to his carelessness. And on January 17th, the father-son duo were raided by federal and state authorities. Now, Michael was a delinquent at the time, so they dismissed the murder charges in return for him pleading guilty to the 2 counts of robbery. And the young gentleman was placed on probation until his 25th birthday. Now, Joseph, his first trial, that was in Pennsylvania, that ended up in a hung jury in June 75. And a retrial came 3 months later. He was convicted on 9 felony counts. He had been sentenced to 30 to 80 years in prison. Now, in October 1976, this was for the murder of Maria Fasching. He received a mandatory life sentence to go with his current sentence consecutively. Now, in prison, he was known for his violent outbursts towards prisoners and shit. He would assault several inmates over time. He actually set his cell block on fire at one point, and himself, in fucking March 1977. Now, March 1978, this was in an unprovoked attack with another inmate. Joseph slit the inmate's throat, but the inmate survived the ordeal. Now, time passed, and he was interviewed for a news report. He was speaking of his desire to slaughter every person on earth and committing suicide so he can become God. So I guess, Ray, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. 10 years later, he'd be tried again, convicted of murdering his son, Joseph Jr. Now, this added 2 more consecutive life sentences on his bill here. And in 1990, he was transferred to Pennsylvania's Fairview State Hospital for the criminally insane. With Joseph's suicide attempts and all his bullshit, his hunger strikes, all that other nonsense, he was moved to Fairview State Hospital for the criminally insane, telling everyone inside that when he dies, he will then become death. Although over the years, he actually seemed to show signs of remorse for his crimes, he did express that over time too. And in his later years, actually, he would start refusing food. He continued on with his suicide attempts, and on March 26th, 1996, the man who had terrorized all of his victims and everything else, he ended up dying of heart failure at the age of 59. And his suicide attempts and all that, he spent the last 11 years of his life in jail on suicide watch. And that, my friends, is another episode in the books. So thank you for tuning back into Twisted Tales. That's all I got for you. I hope you guys have a wicked day, and I'm going to touch up that other episode there and get that done for you. So I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for tuning back in.
Twisted Tales.